When they hear malaria, most people tend to think of tropical countries, laying feverish under a mosquito net in Africa or South America or Asia. It may come as a surprise to many, but malaria was once widespread here in the United States. In fact, it wasn't until the 1950s that this country was declared malaria-free. No one has actually gotten infected with malaria in the US for the last 20 years. That is, at least until this year, 2023, in which we've had 10 cases so far of local, homegrown malaria. I'm a scientist who studies malaria, mostly in Africa, so I figured I'd make this video about malaria a bit closer to home. I want to cover the history of malaria in the US and its ties to slavery and colonialism and war, how we managed to get rid of the disease here, and finally the recent cases and whether we're in danger of having big outbreaks of malaria in the future. First off, some malaria basics. Malaria is caused by parasites that are transmitted by mosquitoes, specifically female Anopheles mosquitoes. So an Anopheles mosquito bites someone with malaria and then bites you, and you may come down with the disease. There are different species of malaria, and two of the most important are Plasmodium falciparum and Plasmodium vivax. Both seem to have originated in Africa, and neither were in the Americas originally. The less deadly one, vivax, probably was brought to the New World by European colonists, arriving sometime after Columbus. The more deadly one, falciparum, arrived to the US when Africans were forcibly brought to the New World in slavery. Since then, for most of US history, we've had a lot of malaria. The mosquitoes that transmit malaria were already here in the US, waiting for malaria to show up. Malaria touches every era of US history. There was a malaria epidemic in the Jamestown settlement in the 1600s, which might be why they abandoned the swampy colony. George Washington had malaria repeatedly throughout his life, and Abraham Lincoln had it twice, once very badly. In its heyday during the Civil War era, malaria was rampant in the southern US, and its range extended all the way up to Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and New York. In the 1930s and 1940s, actions that would get rid of malaria in the US intensified. It was done in a large part accidentally, mostly thanks to digging drainage ditches for agriculture. But people also killed mosquitoes with insecticides like DDT, and honestly probably the most important action, installed screens in their windows. In 1942, the US created these public health centers known as malaria control in war areas to try and stop soldiers from dying of malaria or bringing it back home to infect their families.
She's a robber and a killer. She murders millions of people each year.
Golly, she must be quite a gal. Tell me more about her.
You see, she carries malaria from the sick person to the well person. Then the well person gets sick and can't do a full day's work.
Those malaria control institutions would later evolve into the CDC, and through their efforts, and helped along by a lot of luck, malaria was officially eradicated from the US in 1951. Well, kind of. Every year, a couple thousand or so cases of malaria are imported to the US. Someone goes on vacation or to visit family, gets bitten by an infected mosquito, flies back to the US, and they go to the doctor or hospital and find out that they brought malaria home as a souvenir. For some strains, the incubation period between when you get bit and when you get sick can be 2 weeks, which is plenty of time to travel from just about anywhere to the US. The 10 cases that we're concerned about here aren't imported cases, though. None of the infected people had traveled recently. The 7 cases in Florida, and 1 each in Texas and Maryland and Arkansas, were all Americans who got malaria when they were bit by a US mosquito who got it from another American, meaning we have at least some local transmission of malaria on US soil. The 1 case in Maryland is particularly concerning because it's the more deadly falciparum strain of malaria parasites. So, how worried should you be about malaria if you live in the US? Honestly, probably not that worried, I would say. The fact is, most folks in the US likely aren't bit by mosquitoes enough for us to have sustained malaria transmission in this country. The mosquitoes that transmit malaria tend to bite at night, so simple window screens are really a magical invention that saves lives. It's worth noting that many of the people who contracted this homegrown malaria are unhoused or currently experiencing homelessness. Diseases often follow fault lines of society, and it makes sense that people without shelter would be the most at risk of mosquito-borne diseases like malaria. I hope you enjoyed this short topical note without me on camera for a change. It's nice not filming since I'm sitting here in the dark in my pajamas. If you want to learn about how malaria has shaped the genomes of people in Africa, check out this recent video I did about that topic. And please subscribe if you want more evolutionary biology and medicine content.
Well, well, well. Swimming at sundown and naked all over.